I took him from the house myself. He never stirred, never fought, and I was worried that he was dead for half a heartbeat. The rain came down as we moved through the corn, the scarecrows and I spiriting him to his final rest. The rain had been coming down for days, or maybe weeks, perhaps even years. Who can say? The farm has become a world unto itself, and I am the master of it all. I took him to the barren patch of field. I took him to the altar. He stirred as we pressed him to his knees. He gazed up at the altar, seeing it again, and hung his head down in the rain. His flax-colored hair hung limp and wet as the rain came down around him, and it almost looked like tears as his pants legs soaked up the mud. To his credit, he didn't run. He didn't beg. He was cowed and defeated at the end of his life. It appeared that exhaustion had given him the courage he always lacked in life. Too late, though. Much too late. The straw men gathered around the altar, watching as the sun set, though you couldn't tell it. The sky has been dark for as long as I can remember, and it would stay dark until the sacrifice was made. Then all this would truly be mine. I would finally have my just deserts, and I would finally see my brother punished for his betrayal. The rain came down, and the scarecrows gathered. The time had begun. My tongue spoke words that my mind could not fathom. The wind repeated those arcane phrases as I stepped behind Bradley. The scarecrows rustled, silent as the grave, as Mama's razor came free of my sleeve. The cornstalks shuddered in the hearty breeze as the cold metal pressed against his throat. I closed my eyes, willing him to speak, to beg, to do anything at all before I ended his worthless life. But he only bent in the mud, saying nothing at all. He never even grunted when I split his flesh and let his blood patter to the field. The altar drank him dry when I pushed him over and let him die against the stones. The rain came down as he lay amongst the coarse stones. The scarecrows stood stock still as the wind buffeted them. I too stood like a statue as I watched the altar. The wet stones spattered red as they hunkered like so much useless rock. The wind whistled through the cornstalks as I stood there, suddenly shivering under the buffet of the cold autumn air. Around me, the world remained much the same. I started to get nervous. Was I wrong? Had I been tricked? I had met this creature in the woods. He had spoken to me about what must be done. He had promised me service for my devotion, reward for my sacrifice, but now I was left with only the company of these hay constructs and the whistling wind. What was I going to do? What would I tell the people of the town? Was there still a town? How would I? Do you doubt he who has given you so much? I jumped as the altar pulsed with a murky aura. The rocks began to thicken, to frost, and the small box in the center began to swim with a foul soup. As I stood, the wind whipping past my ears, I could hear the clop of hooves and the clank of armor. Something was thundering out of the hole, growing closer and closer. As it grew, I began to worry that it wouldn't fit through the opening I had made. The altar would be too small. He wouldn't fit. I had come all this way to be thwarted by my own inadequacies. I worried right up until his steed plunged from the altar like a new child from its placental sack. The hooves of that midnight charger, that 7-foot destrier of raven muscle, sank into the mud of my simple farmyard. Its rider was no more ineloquent. His armor was a perfect mix of glacier blue and summer green, the plates appearing moss-like in their sheen. His helmet bore a rack of magnificent antlers, and across his back hung a huge two-handed sword. The eyes beneath his helmet were jack-o'-lantern's coals, and his voice boomed out as though from the throat of a bell. "Thank you, loyal and noble servant. You have brought me forth. You have paid me tribute, and now you shall have your reward. The lands of your fathers are yours, so saith the Lord of Winter, the bringer of the cold, the reaper of the harvest, and the lamentation of the unprepared. Green man, green man, green man, green man." The wind seemed to chant his name, the scarecrows vibrating those very words, and the cold, muddy land felt as though it vibrated at his presence as he stood before me. The green man had come. I heard the scrape of a blade on a frozen window, the sound of an icicle as it pierces the lake, and looked up to see that monstrous sword gripped within his mailed hand. I cowered, believing that this would be my reward, my comeuppance for my betrayal. But he only laughed as I knelt in the mud. When he slid from his horse, his mailed feet shook the earth, and the mud froze as he touched it. He stood before me, towered over me, and I finally looked up to find the icy point of that great weapon before my face. "Even now, you believe I would kill you? No, you are my creature. Your fields and lands belong to me. And though I allow you to till them, farmer, they remain my fief and domain. You will give me sacrifice, crop, and blood, so that I may walk amongst my lands. And for that, I shall grant you your reward." He slipped the tip into my shoulder, only an inch, but the blade's cold was worse than any winter blizzard. I felt like frostbite ran through me, and I cried out as his power ravaged me. When he pulled free, my every breath was that of steam and cold. Over time, my fingers would take on a pallor, my feet would thicken, my toes blacken, and my eyes would forever be dark and ringed. I would live, have lived, for so many years under his rule. I lost much when the green man made me his emissary, but I gained so much more. The rain still falls upon my father's land. The city was washed away, lying now beneath a lake, but still there are people that live upon the shore. They fish the water, take the water for their town, and even come to Towesey Island on occasions. They see the trees that grow here. They see the corn, the beans, the squash, but never a pumpkin. No, never that. They come to take and explore, but few of them leave the island again. Towesey Island is greedier than even they know sometimes. It takes all it can from a man, or a boy, but sometimes it gives you more than you can understand. The crops grow year-round. The rain keeps the island shrouded in mist. The altar sometimes tastes its share of blood. The green man is appeased. The farmhands, 3 men and a woman, all still dirty from the field, looked up from their meal as they ate. I hadn't touched my own food, my stew sitting cold before me, and none of them seemed to want to touch theirs either. They had come to this island to help me with my crops, to help with the harvest as I had requested, but after that story, all were thinking it might be high time to leave. The crops were in now. This was their last night on Towesey Island before they left for Sarah's parents' house, and they were suddenly wondering if they could make that trek in the dark. Paul blew out a long breath. "Dang, Greg, that was quite a dinner story. You didn't tell us you were such a tale-teller." I smiled. My brother always said I had a flair for the macabre. He was always terrified of my stories, but I suppose that this one might be in poor taste. Sarah cleared her throat, picking up plates as she made to do the dishes. It certainly was scary. You should write them down. You have a real knack for stories. Oh, I may one day. But I suppose you'd all like to get to bed. It's late, and you have a long trip tomorrow. They all said their goodnights and headed for the rooms down the hall. The rooms that had once belonged to my brothers. I waited for them to close their doors before making my way to the barn. I would need to get ready for tonight's work. It was nearly the appointed time, and it was best not to keep him waiting. They had asked about the strange rock pile over the last 4 weeks. It was actually what had brought the story on in the first place. I had told them it was just a geological formation that my father had been unable to move. I opened the desk and took out the razor I had used to end Bradley's life. It was sharp, not a speck of blood on the blade or the handle, and I gave it a few licks across the whetstone just to be sure. It would need to be sharp for tonight's work. They would be terrified when the scarecrows came for them, and I wanted their passing to be as easy as possible. They really had been good farm hands, and they deserved more than the $200 apiece I had offered them. They deserved a place in his halls where they would want for nothing ever again. I heard the screen door slap as someone forgot to catch it, and looked out the door to see 4 figures running from the house. They all stopped and gawked at the field of corn that had sprung up, seemingly at will, a thick and bountiful crop that I would have easily brought in myself. I did bring it in myself from time to time, selling it in town when I needed something, but I couldn't very well sacrifice the corn. That's why I needed the farm hands that no one would miss from time to time. Paul pulled Sarah into the corn, Fred and Mark following after. I sighed. It was always more difficult when they ran, but in the end, it would all be the same. My first sacrifice had been 4, and thus, so would this one. The Green Man would have his due. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. I hope you're enjoying tonight's story, and a very happy Halloween to all of you. This is the end of the Towesey Homestead series, and I do so hope you've enjoyed my week of spooky stories all the way up till Halloween. Time now to thank our patrons, though. Thanks in part to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. We just couldn't do it without you, and welcome back to the fold. If you too would like to be one of our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, come on by Patreon. For only $5 a month, you too can have your name read out at the end of every video. Or you might consider buying a book on Amazon. I have some links below, and I have quite a few good ones. I just recently put out Dark Journeys, my latest compilation, and you might find some of the stories a little bit familiar if you're a regular on my Reddit. And as always, don't forget to come back next Wednesday for more spooky tales. And have a wonderful evening, and a wonderful Halloween as well.